Assalamu alaikum. Dear students, welcome to the second part of lecture number 12. In continuation to the previous topic, today we will start from allopatric speciation. We were discussing different species terminologies. So today we will start from allopatric species. What are allopatric species? So those species which are occupying different geographical region or area. So it's very simple. Those species which are occupying different geographical areas, they are not living in the same geography, are known as like allopatric species. So an explanation. So when a species separate into two separate groups, for example, if you have a group of species and they are like for example they are evenly distributed on a certain area, but because of some reason, for example a physical barrier appear between them, like for example mountain range or a waterway or some other thing which make it impossible for them to breed with each other and they become isolated. So that's why with the passage of time they will differentiate into new species, and such species which are geographically isolated because of some barrier between them are known as allopatric species. So each species will develop into develop differently. Why? Because of the demands of their unique habitat. For example, they were first they were living like evenly on in some area, but because of the appearance of the barrier between them, they become isolated. And now, because of the demands or the needs of their unique habitat, they will develop differently, and the genetic characteristics of those differences will be passed on to their offspring. And what happens? New species will arise with the passage of time. So here is a diagrammatic representation of allopatric speciation or allopatric species. So don't think about these. Just think about allopatric. Allopatric speciation, how it occurs. For example, this is the original population. An initial step of speciation is the appearance of barrier between these two populations, and then evolution of reproductive isolation. Mean because of the isolation, they cannot interbreed with each other, they cannot exchange genes with each other. So the way with the passage of time, on based on the needs of their environment, those changes will accumulate in these population, and they will like differentiate with the passage of time. So the yellow color indicates that the changes are accumulating in them and now they are different from each other. So new distinct species will arise after some time. So it's not a very easy thing. It will take too much time, like hundreds and millions of time. Let me give you an example. In this picture you can see the Grand Canyon of Arizona. So before the appearance of this canyon, uh, the, the population of this squirrel, it was evenly distributed on this whole land. But when this canyon it appeared, so it become a barrier. It become a barrier between the two population. So now the population on the south side cannot interbreed with the north side, and north side cannot interbreed with the south side because of the presence of this barrier. So when this barrier was not present, they were interbreeding with each other and there was no problem. But because of the appearance of this canyon, they become isolated, and now you can say these are totally allopatric population. This is the northern side squirrel and the southern side squirrel. They are very different from each other now because they are isolated, and with the passage of time, like changes will accumulate in them and they will speciate and a new species will arise. So now you can see this is the Harris antelope square. The southern side is very different from the northern side white-tailed antelope squirrel because of the presence of that barrier, the appearance of that barrier, they differentiated into new species. So such species are called allopatric species, which are geographically isolated, and a speciation which occur through this isolation is known as allopatric speciation. And I already discussed this example with you guys. Because of the presence of this Arizona Canyon, Grand Canyon, these two populations they become isolated, and because they were no longer in contact and they were not able to reproduce with each other, so that's why they become isolated. So they could no longer interbreed, and the square population underwent allopatric speciation. So now today two separate square species inhabit the north and the southern side of the canyon. So now they are very different from each other. On the other hand, birds and other species that could easily cross the barrier continue to interbreed or not divided into separate population. So because it's not barrier for them, those animals which can fly, there was no problem, so they are fine. But because these two the populations of the squirrel, they were not able to interbreed, so they speciate. The second one is the Sympatric species or Sympatric speciation. So Sympatric species mean those species which are occupying the same geographical region or area are called Sympatric speciation species. So those species which are living in the same geography. So let me make it clear that scientists they are not agree. Most of them they are not agree with the Sympatric speciation. They do not believe in Sympatric speciation. But anyhow, it's a fact. Sometimes it happens. It may happen spontaneously because of certain mutations, but though it happens. So explanation is like Sympatric speciation occur when there is no physical barrier preventing any member of a species from mating with other, and all members are in a close proximity with one another. They are interbreeding, they are present with each other, they are not like geographically isolated, but still speciation occur. So a new species, perhaps based on different food source or characteristics, seem to develop spontaneously. So as I told you that some scientists they do not believe in Sympatric speciation, but anyhow it may occur spontaneously, it may happen spontaneously. So the theory is that some individual become dependent on certain aspects of the environment, and such as shelter or food source, while other do not. So maybe because of these like explanations, like for example shelter or some sources of food, and while other do not, so maybe that's why they become different species. But anyhow, this is Sympatric speciation. So in this picture, you can see this is allopatric speciation. The population of these trees, this is very normal. The green color shows that they are all same species because they are interbreeding with each other. But because of the appearance of this barrier between them, now in the next picture you can see, because of this appearance of the barrier, they become isolated, and with the passage of time they differentiated into new species. So now you can see this, the deep green color and the light green color shows the different populations or the different species. Sympatric species, now you can see the population is equally distributed, all are the same species, and something happened, there is no isolation. You can see they are still living in the same area, in the same vicinity, but spontaneously something happened, maybe because of depending on shelter or food or something happened, and you can see the small population they differentiated into new species, so it may be spontaneous. So now all other are green, and this is the new species. So this is Sympatric speciation, and this population is known as Sympatric species. So these are allopatric species, Sympatric species, Sympatric, allopatric speciation, and this one is Sympatric speciation. The example of Sympatric speciation is from the North American apple maggot fly. So this is North American apple maggot fly. So let me give you the example. For example, this apple maggot fly, it is an insect that lays its egg inside the fruit of apple and cause it to rot. So as the apple falls on the ground, the maggot dig into the ground, and then after several months they raise flies. So the apple maggot originally, this apple maggot, they originally laid its eggs in the fruit of relative of apple. So that is known as hawthorn. So a hawthorn fruit or hawthorn tree or hawthorn fruit is like apple. It's a relative to apple. It's not apple, but it is a relative of apple. So before the introduction of the apple trees into the areas, these apple maggots, they were originally these apple maggots, or these flies were actually originally they were laying their eggs inside the hawthorn fruit. But when apples were introduced into North America in the 19th century, so a type of maggot developed that only lays its egg in apple. So after the introduction of this fruit tree, the apple fruit trees into the North America, now some of them, they started like laying their eggs, and development of the maggots happened in the apples. So they become like different species, because now the original hawthorn species still only lays eggs in hawthorns, but the two types of maggots are now different species. So because now those insects or those flies which are now like laying their eggs in the apple, they cannot lay their eggs in the hawthorn, and those who are laying their eggs in the hawthorns cannot lay their eggs in the apples. So the apples, the maggots are now adopted to the apples, and the other population is adopted to the hawthorn. So now they are very different. So before the introduction of the apple, the population was the same, or there was only one population which was laying its eggs in the hawthorn food. But after introduction, some of them, they become isolated. They started laying their eggs in the apples, and then they differentiated into different species. So though these flies, they were living in the same areas, they were sympatric, but still the speciation occurs. So this kind of speciation is known as sympatric speciation. But many scientists believe they are undergoing the process of sympatric speciation. So now we were discussing allopatric speciation and sympatric. So we discussed allopatric. Now this is sympatric. Mean this is the original population. An initial step in speciation is genetic polymorphism in certain area in the middle. The population is not like isolated. They are in the same area, but still something happened. Speciation occurred. So evolution of the isolation. Now this population will become reproductive isolated. It's very simple. Like you can consider this green color as that fruit fly, which were laying their eggs in the hawthorn. And when the apples were introduced, so some of them, they started laying their eggs in the apples, and then now they are reproductively isolated. So this yellow color shows that like the apple, those flies which are laying their eggs in the apple trees or fruit, and the green one are those who are laying their eggs in the hawthorn. So with the passage of time, they become different species. So this is sympatric speciation. This is allopatric speciation. The other one is like peripatric speciation. So what is peripatric speciation? When a small group of individuals break off from the larger group and form a new species. So it's again very simple. There's a parent population, a small population become isolated, and which is known as peripheral population. And when they become geographically isolated and there is no exchange of gene, so with the passage of time, they will develop into new species. So, like as in allopatric speciation, physical barrier is the reason, which make it impossible for the member or group to interbreed with another. But the main difference between the allopatric speciation and the parapatric speciation is that in parapatric speciation, one group is much smaller and the other is larger. I mean, one is the parent one, which is the larger one, and one is the smaller one, which is the peripheral one. So unique characteristics of the smaller group are passed on to the future generation in the group, which make them different from the other, and it will distinguish it from the main population. And then what happens, like they become different. So this is the Peripatric speciation. What happens, this is the original population, initial step of the speciation, a small patch which is known as peripheral population now entered into a different niche, a different environment, and with the passage of time they become reportedly isolated from the main population and new species arise. So this is Peripatric speciation. Then there is Parapatric speciation. So as a species is spread out over a large geographic area. So when the species they spread over a large geographic area, so there is a chance of speciation that a small group of them they restrict themselves and then they start interbreeding within the near vicinity, and now because of the restricted vicinity they become different species. So although it is possible for any member of the species to mate with any other individual or only mate with those in their own geographic region. But like allopatric and parapatric speciation, different habitats influence the development of different species in parapatric speciation. So instead of being separated by a physical barrier, the species are separated by differences in the same environment. So for example, a species is distributed over a very large area, geographic area. So they can interbreed with each other, but the animal will prefer to interbreed with the nearest one. So that's why maybe some of them they like become isolated from the rest of the population, because everyone will try to interbreed with those which are in the near vicinity, and that what it will cause the Parapatric speciation. The example of this is the flightless Australian grasshopper. And you can see this is the Parapatric speciation. So this is the main population and they are spread over a long area. So for example, if this small patch, they are not like isolated, you can see they are isolated, these are isolated, these are not isolated, so they are spread over a large area. But now this small population, they will try to interbreed over here in the near vicinity. They can interbreed, this population can interbreed here and this can interbreed there, but because of their presence in the near vicinity, they will try to interbreed within that population, and with the passage of time what happens, they become isolated like reproductively and they become different species as speciation occurs. Now another is the super species. So what is super species? Yes, a superspecies is a monophyletic group of closely related and entirely or largely allopatric species that are too distinct to be included in a single species, or that demonstrate their reproductive isolation in a zone of contact. So superspecies is a group of monophyletic group. Monophyletic means that they belong to the same parents. They are descended from the same parents and they are closely related, and they are entirely or largely allopatric, mean they are not occupying the same geography, they are like physically they are isolated from each other, and they are those are too distinct to be included in the single species, and they are much different that by looking into them you cannot say that they are the same species. And when you bring them together in a contact, they show reproductive isolation. They are not interbreeding with each other, they do not interbreed, so such species are known as superspecies. Example is a wood warbler family. For example, there is a black-throated green warbler. This is the ancestor, and then the other populations are Townsend's, hermit, and the golden-cheeked warbler. So the Townsend, the hermit warblers, and the golden-cheeked warblers, and the black-throated gray warblers. So this is the ancestor, but they become like all of them, they are descendant from the common parents. Like the parents for the one, they are a monophyletic group. But the Townsend's, hermit, the golden cheek, the black-throated, the grey warblers, because of they are closely related. but because of their allopatric distribution, they are too distinct to be included in the single species, because they are very different physically, like morphologically they are very different. And when you bring these all population, they will show like reproductive isolation. They will not interbreed with each other. So these are now you can say these are the super species of this black-throated green warbler. So these are the ancestor. So Townsend's is the super species, and hermit is the super species, golden cheek and cheeked, and the black-throated gray warblers. These are the super species. See you in the third part of this lecture, and if you have any question, please ask.